Hi everyone. Greetings. I hope we've got the group with Cian in, because I know that's most of you. Uh, I'll kick off with tonight we've got the final talk. Tonight / this morning, I should say. We've got the final talk in the online series, and that is TAKA Architects, also in Dublin. So I'm sure everyone remembers Colm from 2 weeks ago. Now we have Alice, and Alice is the director, as I said, of TAKA, that she founded with her partner in crime, Cian, who is not joining us tonight, I assume, or at least there hasn't been talk of Cian.
No, he's not. He has a site meeting this morning, so couldn't make it.
Excellent. Well, we only need one half to
got the best one.
Make it work. Yes, I assumed as much. So the last time I saw you deliver a lecture online was at Yale, and I thought it would be a logical next step for TAKA to to join us after those heady heights. So I'm really looking forward to the talk tonight. Just to sort of give everyone a little bit of an orientation about what Alice is going to talk about. There's a long-term project that TAKA have been working on in Dublin at a place called Belvedere College. You can probably see that on your screen. And well, Alice is going to give us the real story, but I'm going to describe it as a series of micro projects and a master plan. So very similar to the project that all of our students are going to be working on. So I'm quietly confident that it's going to be highly relevant, informative, and entertaining. So that's enough an intro, I think, Alice, and take it away. Oh, sorry, I always forget. Questions in the Q&A thing down the bottom, and I'll relay them at the end of the talk if we've got time. So over to you, Alice. Thank you.
Thanks, Aaron, and thanks for everyone for coming and listening to me today, or this evening. It's this morning for me, 10 a.m. I'm going to start off with, because Aaron asked us to speak a little bit about how we transition from being a student to having our own practice. So I'll talk a little bit about that, and then I'll get into Belvedere College. I'm going to keep an eye on the time because I've never presented this project before. So if I'm running long, please pipe up and just tell me to stop. And I'm going to try and keep it to 30 minutes as we've required. So first of all, myself and Cian, who are married, but we met in the final year of college, and we have our own practice called TAKA Architects. We graduated in 2003 from what is now TU Dublin. And in 2003, it was sort of what we like to call in Ireland the Celtic Tiger years. It was incredibly economically strong and quite different for Ireland. And there were lots of work opportunities in Dublin for architects at the time. But a lot of the previous generations of Irish architects had all emigrated. They'd gone to the UK and Germany and America. And in 2003, we sort of instinctively felt that we wanted to sort of move abroad, even though there was plenty of work offers at home. And we were the only two people from our class to actually leave. So we both went to London. Cian started working for Neil McLaughlin Architects. He's a very well-known and quite brilliant architect in London. And I worked for a small practice called Curtis Wood Architects, doing mainly domestic refurbishments and extension, like you can see on the right. No new builds, and an incredibly intense sort of practice where there was maybe 30 jobs and only a director and 2 graduates. So it was a very steep learning curve there. And we spent 3 years in London. We did our part 3, so our professional exams. And the minute we got those, we decided to leave. But we had those 3 years were really kind of apprenticeships. We did a lot of sort of learning and work in those. We had actually decided to go home, but before we came back to Ireland, we treated ourselves to a bit of traveling. So there was a year-long trip around the world. I actually only did the first 4 or 5 months of it. Cian went the whole hog. And in that we visited, it was very architecture focused actually, which is all a bit nerdy. And we've sort of visited a mixture of kind of what you call high or modernist architecture, and then also lots of vernacular buildings. And the trip was really influential on the practice. Our practice name comes from being in Bangladesh. The taka is a Bangladeshi currency. And I don't think our practice would be the same without having done this trip. And it kind of filled our heads with loads of ideas and inspirations for when we got home. So I just need to do this. So we came back to Ireland in 2008, and Cian started working for O'Donnell Toomey, which again is a very good and well-known practice. And I worked for Tom DeQuare in DeQuare Architects. And during that time, while we were working full-time in those practices, we began thinking about setting up our own practice. And things were still good in Ireland in sort of 2007, 2008. And we were very lucky that two parts of my family wanted new homes on the same site. And we sort of took that on as our first project. And this was just before the recession, and there was sort of lots of money and opportunity around at the time. So it wasn't that big a deal to take on these two projects while we were working for other people. But we did sort of reduce our hours to 4 days a week in both the jobs, and carried out those first two projects. But in 2010, the recession hit, and we both lost our, what you'd call our proper jobs, our full-time salary paid jobs. But again, we were lucky because by this stage we had finished those first two projects and we had something to actually build our own practice on. There was no option. There was no work in Ireland, you know, salaried work. We had to make our own practice then. So it sort of forced us out into the world. And these are some photos of those first projects. We were interested in the language of construction and assembly and reimagining those in a traditional context. And then also ideas about social ritual as a way of organizing domestic space. We then carried on and did some more houses and extension for friends and family. This is one for Cian's best friend. It's actually opposite his mother's house in Dublin. And this way of working was, you know, it was kind of productive in terms of projects, but it wasn't particularly profitable for us. So we were also teaching part-time. I think I was teaching in 2 different universities at that time, which just helped with paying the bills. And then we were given an opportunity for a small competition for a local sports club. It was something that I think if we were faced with now, we probably wouldn't do because the budget was so unreasonable. But we took it very seriously at the time, and we made a really good presentation to the entirety of the club membership, and they voted and we won the job. Now, as I say, we were lucky. Again, I keep talking about luck on these things because I think practice takes a lot of luck. That actually the existing pavilion was flooded just before we put in planning, and it was completely destroyed, and they got a big insurance payout, and they could, you know, get the proper budget to make a really good project. So that was Merrion Cricket Club. And actually this links into how we started working in Belvedere College. So this building won Best Leisure Building at the Irish Architecture Awards in, I think, 2015 or 2014. And the building committee in Belvedere College saw this and invited us in to do another mini competition for a very big new sports pavilion in their sports grounds. Now, this project, it was actually never built, unfortunately, but we did get all the way to signing a building contract for it. But then it was, I suppose, paused, but really cancelled as the board decided they wanted to spend money on their campus rather than spending money on this big sports pavilion. So that then, they then thankfully, because we were very disappointed that building didn't go to site, they asked us to look at the campus and to look at the kind of future vision for the campus. So to develop a master plan. And this is that school. It's a city centre. It's a very well-known private boys' school in the city centre of Dublin. Sort of famously, James Joyce was a former student. And we started with developing a master plan for the campus, and it's kind of like dreaming up some sort of utopian future vision. But since then, we've been carrying out refurbishment projects. So this is the projects that Aaron was talking about, some of them micro, some of them less micro. And so really it's about, we are kind of almost like campus architects. As and when a project is needed, they ask us to quote for the job, and then we carry it out. So the reason I call the master plan a sort of utopian future vision, because the realities and the pragmatics of working on the campus mean that it's actually very difficult to do anything, to make any kind of startlingly new change. Because any construction work they can't close down the school, so the school has to function throughout construction. There's no room to get temporary accommodation because it's a very dense city centre site. So there's no space to fit temporary classrooms. So any construction work has to have the school working fully. And so because of this, our approach to the campus is probably quite different to other projects in our practice. You know, architects like to be in control of things. And when you're working in this sort of situation, it's very difficult to be in control of everything. So we have to be very pragmatic and react to whatever situation we find ourselves in, rather than, you know, imagining something completely new or innovative. So just to manage expectations, there's no new build here, and very little of the projects that we do is actually visible on the external of the buildings. So as I said, it's a very dense city centre project, very dense city centre campus, which has evolved over time. So I've sort of listed out vaguely the eras of all the buildings. It started in the I think I said 1850s there, but actually it's the 1830s with a large Georgian house in the centre. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but that's it there. And then new buildings are added. It seems like new buildings are added every 20 years or so, but maybe it's every generation wants to make their change. And I've also noted on that the structural system for each building, because as we've discovered over the last 10 years in working here, the existing structure and construction dictates how you intervene. The biggest technical challenge actually in the refurbishment projects that we do is something really boring, like upgrading the fire resistance of the structure. And to be honest with you, we give thanks every time we find a concrete structure, because it's much, much easier to deal with than any other type of structure. But you'll see why in later projects. So I'm going to go through this fairly fast because I'm just conscious of time. So this was the master plan. We made a model like this, but like all master plans, it's out of date the minute the ink dries on the paper. And I think we've done 4 versions of this master plan since then. And these are the projects that we've carried out, which are probably smaller in scale than the master plan sort of envisioned, but they're what is required and what's possible. And that's the big key, is what is possible within all those kind of pragmatic constraints of the campus. So generally, we've done a project a year. There's a bit of a break, a couple of years for COVID. And the projects get larger and more complex over time. I think that was mainly because the school started to trust that a small and relatively inexperienced practice could deliver what they needed, that we could cope with working within the school. So I'm going to start and try and go through these pretty quickly because there's a fair few of them. So the campus is the size of a city block, but our first project was very small. It's the front door, but it's a space which every visitor to the campus passes through. So as I said, we work in a very direct and pragmatic way, and it's mainly because the projects had to be carried out during school holidays to minimize disruption to the students. So the construction period for this project was actually a 2-week period over the Easter holidays. We had to make sure most elements were prefabricated and assembled relatively quickly on site. The complication, and there's always a complication in these things, came when linking the new doors into things like the campus services, like fire alarm. You know, there's automatic opening vents above the doors that link to the fire alarm, and then things like access control and all that kind of stuff. So, but architecturally, the door became about creating profile. You'll see it's quite a flat elevation onto the kind of street. And this was about pushing and pulling the surface and details to create thresholds and depth. So this is the front door as it was. It was this kind of grand entrance, but perversely lacked presence on the street. People were regularly confused about how to get into the school, and they kind of missed this door despite the size of it. I think it's mainly because it looks closed off and has a kind of sort of prison quality. And so this was the new composition that we inserted within that stone surround. And the new composition gave hierarchy to the different functions of the entrance and just increased its presence on the street. And from the inside, we were very keen to increase transparency. We wanted to welcome the city into the campus, and because the campus can feel quite cut off from its urban situation. And this is it as it sits in one of those kind of early 2000s buildings. And so the next project was carried out over summer holidays, and it's quite a lot of work to do over summer holidays, especially as state exams run until the end of June. So there was quite a bit of problem with noise and stoppages and all these things. So, but this was a new dining hall and an IT room. The school had 2 dining areas in the campus, but they have to cater to 1,000 students in a 30-minute period. So the second of the 2 dining areas was what we were looking at. And that needed to just increase its ability to accommodate students and to accommodate them quickly. So it was in a fairly miserable basement in a 1950s buildings, and it was too small and a pretty depressing place, to be honest with you. So this is it. And it's a building which externally pretends to be from the 1850s, but it's actually from the 1950s. You can see that in the concrete frame that's there. And we're doing another project currently in the upper floors of the building, and I'll talk a little bit more about it later. So the concrete structure is there. You can see the beams and the columns in the center. And the project involved opening up the basement level so that it could seat around 150 students, but probably accommodate a lot more in queues and kind of serveries. And a small but significant problem for the project was the queuing, because there was probably 300 or 400 students coming for each lunch period. Previously, the servery was here, and the queue used to, I don't know, anyway, I'm hoping you can see my cursor. The queue used to kind of wind its way here and then snake up all this stairs and out into the courtyard, which was causing a problem for everyone. So I'll show you how we changed that. But then really the biggest architectural challenge was to give character and presence into this space, which is essentially a pretty crappy basement. We also needed to control noise. If there's 300 or 400 people here all eating, it's a very noisy place. So we added these curved plasterboard vaults between the concrete beams, which are those, and those vaults baffled the sound. They deadened all the sound of people coming in. And then we had these kind of small vaults, which were for deadening the sound, and then the larger vaults in the areas either side of the stair core, which gave more kind of intimate and still spaces for smaller groups or studying. And like all our projects in Belvedere, the project became about adding linings to what exists. So adding a new layer, and those linings maybe suggest modes of occupation for the school. And as well as those curved ceilings, the space is lined with storage and fitted furniture. So this is it before, and this is what it became. The concrete frame you can see in the middle was sandblasted in places. This was an idea about giving the students an idea of what the building is made of. Lighting and services, we use those beams to group those and rationalize the lightings and services, and leave those kind of curved surfaces free of any fittings. This is that problematic queuing area. And this is how it is now. We moved the servery deeper into the plan. We kind of marked it with these folding blackboards and this canopy of lights overhead. And then the loose furniture was arranged in these long rows, which allows the queue to get quite long and contain itself within the space rather than going outside. And at the entrance space, the ceiling vaults change direction. And there's this overly large mat well, which protects the wear and tear of the floor from those very large numbers of students in short periods of time. These are those side alcoves near the stair core. The curved ceilings appear to float and stop short of the external elevations in this area here. And I think as a fairly feeble attempt at subversion, I like to include as much pink in a boys' school as I'm allowed. So these ceilings are painted in it's actually white, but it's got this pink undertone, which appears quite pink in some lights. But you'll see I get more pink in later. The second project in this part of this project was the fit out of an IT room on the floor above the dining hall. The problem to solve here was to create a classroom where the teacher could see all the students' screens from their own desks, which resulted in a slightly crazy layout, but it was quite effective. So this was where the teacher sat, and then he or she could see 30 screens, which hadn't been possible in any of the other IT rooms that they'd had previously. And that sort of looked like this. And it was about kind of color and tone to keep the kind of dark down the bottom so that the screens sort of disappear a little bit when you're in the room, and everything quite light and bright above. And then that central ceiling, which focus you towards the kind of projector screen at the end. So that picture is taken from the teacher's sitting place. So we're into 2019. So this is the gym refurbishment. And this was another summer project. And the budget and the program for this were incredibly tight. We weren't actually hired as architects for this because there wasn't the budget for it. And we were only really kind of appointed to advise on paint colors. So, you know, being architects and wanting to get, you know, wring every bit of energy out of everything, or the whole project became about giving character with color. So we couldn't do any drawings for this because we didn't have any drawings. So we ended up, and normally that's the way we do our projects. So this is a very strange way for us to work. We normally make a really exhaustive set of drawings and specifications for every project. So, but our input on this just consisted of marking up photos, which was a strange, but maybe kind of enjoyable way to work. I mean, they're not very beautiful, but they were effective in kind of communicating what we wanted. That's a changing area that it became quite yellow. So this was the gym before. It was really in need of a bit of TLC. And again, not much changed in the gym physically, but it was just about that kind of repaint and refresh, and then using color to kind of zone and demarcate where things happen within the spaces. Again, these are kind of internal rooms with no natural light. So trying to create that sense of place just through color. And the swimming pool refurbishment was, I think, summer, or maybe, anyway, I can't quite remember when it was. But it was a similar type of project. Again, a very, very restricted budget. It was supposed to be just a redecoration. It's very difficult just to redecorate a pool. And again, there was no traditional architect role for us, and we didn't manage the construction at all. But we did get to choose tiling colors and even managed to actually do a few drawings for this one. And the big challenge with the swimming pool was a total lack of natural light. So again, it became about using color to bring life and, I suppose, vibrancy to these kind of inward-looking rooms. So we worked with sketches a lot. So I'm trying to show you all the different ways that we make these projects happen, you know, and these, as I say, these are unusual ways for us to work because normally we're kind of doing very detailed drawings, but for this project, we worked through sketches a lot. And this one is about trying to control the new tiling to the swimming pool. So the tiling was actually selected by the contractor, and then we got to select within that range, I suppose, how those tiles might work. And then we're taking that proposed tiling range and making a scheme which we felt was cohesive. And initially we'd wanted all the tiles around the pool to be this dark blue, but it turns out that it's quite a good idea to mark the edge of the pool in a different color so that people, you know where the edge is and don't fall in by mistake. So we're learning things, even though we're only selecting tiles for this, we're learning really important things as we go along. And then, you know, that actually the tiles in a pool aren't blue, they are white or something. And then there's, you know, it's a funny old situation. So this was the pool beforehand, where somebody in the 1970s definitely had a bit of fun with avocado green tiling. And this is how it was after. So that use of color is about bringing order and hierarchy to the space. There was no budget even to change lighting in this. Everything was just repainted and given color. Same with all the guardings and things. They just couldn't be changed. But we did get to do some proper tiling drawings in the changing room. These patterns are, I think I'd been to an Annie Albers exhibition and was fairly fascinated by how she makes patterns, repeating patterns. So that's what those patterns are about. They're about marking significant places within the changing rooms. We had things like we had to retain the existing flooring in a lot of the rooms, and most of the sanitary ware was actually reused. It was taken down and put back up. And we tried to save things like the existing benches, but once they were removed, it turns out they were rotten completely. So they had to be replaced with sort of cheap alternatives. So you can see there on the right, that's that beautiful retained existing floor and our kind of tiling patterns. Okay. And then out in the corridors, again, they were just very tired, very brown, and about just lifting them. In this case, we did get to change the floor because it had been patched so often it was fairly useless and becoming a trip hazard. And then grouping things like grooming stations together, and then introducing these kind of areas of pink to just try and enliven the space for them. And this is probably our largest project to date. And Aaron, please tell me if you need me to stop. I'll go through this as quickly as I can. But this is the Finlay building. So we refurbished 2 or 3 floors of the Finlay building, and it was about enlarging what were very small classrooms. And we discovered during the project that the building is actually made of 2 distinct wings that were built at different times. One has a timber structure, the other has a steel structure. And the big challenge of this was to enlarge the classrooms, but then also provide 60 minutes fire protection, which is not easy with a historic timber and steel structure. The building had obvious character, but it had gone through a fair amount of abuse during its lifetime. So it was about 130 years old. So these were the classrooms. Apologies for the fuzziness. These are kind of taken from site reports. It had lots of these kind of beautiful timber, but that had been suffered from many, many coats of stains and paint. We started the project by opening up, cutting holes and things to try and tell what things are made of. It was helpful, but gave us a slightly false sense of security that we understood the building. But we didn't. There were still lots of surprises during construction. And one of the biggest problems for this project was this historic steel structure. You can see here, these are the beams, and there's columns that come down here, and then there's bracing beams here. And we needed to get these to have 60 minutes fire protection. And that's a very difficult thing if you want to retain all this timber work around here, which we really wanted to do because it was really the main character of the building. So in our practice, we find the only way to understand and solve problems is to draw them. So we set about surveying the structure as we could understand it and making drawings of it. And we wanted to try and understand how we could add fire protection without removing all those lovely timber features. We had a structural fire engineer carry out a heat transfer analysis of the entire structure. And we're able to prove that in places the existing thick timber linings provided a similar fire protection to the structure as a double layer of plasterboard. And this was helped by the fact that the historic timber was much slower growing and denser than modern timber. So this is a drawing about trying to keep this frame and all that, but adding in places we did have to put double layers of plasterboard in. So this is the classroom corridors as they were. They're fairly bleak. And this is how they are. And although these pictures look like it's only the finishes that were replaced, in reality, almost the entire building had to be stripped back to achieve the fire protection strategy. So there was a lot of these existing cross-corridor archways, and they'd been filled in, and these fairly horrible new oak veneered doors had been installed, and it was a sort of a pragmatic but mainly ineffective attempt at fireproofing previously. And a lot of the services were just like they are in all these buildings, just put wherever they needed to be. So our strategy became about stripping back these infills and bringing back the original spatial sense in the corridors, that idea that the corridors lead into one another. And we made this new sort of fire-rated joinery, which were kind of appropriate to the quality and material character of the building, but performed to kind of modern standards. In places, we had to add new fire-rated lobbies to comply with the proper fire strategy, but we were kind of taking care to follow the material clues that the building already had. The historic timber and paneling, which was almost everywhere, not quite everywhere, but almost everywhere, and had been painted many, many times. And the last layer of which was a thick fireproof coating, which was very, very difficult to remove, but it was all carefully stripped back. There was a team of painters on the site for 4 or 5 months, and then refinished with a kind of water-based stain and a transparent fireproof coating. But during that stripping process, a lot of care was taken to keep the historic graffiti and scratching in the paneling, because there's lots of famous Irish men's names in the walls. So the existing doors were mostly intact, but had been modified with things like vision panels cut into them over time. All those doors had to be catalogued and removed, and then they were all repaired and refurbished in ironmongery and things like that, either replaced or refurbished. This is a classroom, and it was a fairly simple approach in the classrooms. They were enlarged, they were all made about a third bigger. And the old layers were peeled back and refurbished, and then new layers were added, all to improve the lighting and the atmosphere. And our new interventions consisted of ensuring really things like modern requirements, like wayfinding and notice boards and vision panels were able to be accommodated, but in a controlled and coherent manner. We had this strategy of applying new layers, which were similar in principle. So this is a new layer here of kind of MDF, but it's a similar sort of color and tone to the existing layer. So that it sort of harmonizes and then using color in a different way to highlight these kind of new functional requirements. But those functional requirements are integrated in part of the building. And I think this photo is quite a good summary of that part of the project. So in this, the original skirting, which you can see at the bottom of the photo, it had to be painted over rather than stripped because there was a existing metal-based paint that just wasn't able to be stripped back of it. Parts of the timber linings here are new because we had to, some of them were defective and we had to replace them to make that fire protection I talked about. And then the scratched and graffitied timber wainscoting is refurbished and retained, and that ensures that the life and the character of the building are evident for the next generation of students. And this is another project which is on the ground floor of that same building. It's the Pastoral Centre, which with the brief here was to create a gathering space for the campus, which also had student support rooms and kind of support spaces around it. So this is one of the rooms that was amalgamated. So there was two of these rooms that were put together to make the Pastoral Centre. This is that Finlay building from the outside, and this is our refurbished entrance to those classroom floors are these two floors up here, and then this is on the ground floor in this position here. It's actually a much longer building than that photo shows you. And then, so we thought for the Pastoral Centre, because it was this gathering space, we wanted to create a space within a space, if that makes sense. And a little bit like that central courtyard that's in the campus. We did this by adding this canopy, which is lined with these deep dark blue acoustic paneling. And the canopy is a bit like the deep blue domes of Greek churches, and it creates a kind of still and quiet center to the room, which could be quite a noisy, busy room. Spaces outside of the canopy, like seating areas or kitchen, are kind of in the gap between the canopy and the external walls of the building. So we have seating areas, entrances, and spaces like kitchen and storage. And then we have those consultation rooms, which are again are sort of further back again, and they look back towards the central space and looking at the rear of that canopy structure. And they became these kind of calm, enveloping spaces with folding shutters that ensured the privacy from the courtyard. The main school courtyard is directly outside of that window. So our linings kind of fold over the windows to make sure that there's privacy in these consultation rooms. And now I'm going to end with some projects which are in progress at the moment, and one that is future, hopefully in the future. So this is Junior House. It's the same building as the dining hall and IT room project, which I showed you earlier. We have a project to refurbish all of the upper floors and to make a new roof garden, which is up here. We're in the middle of trying to figure out how to do that. This is that building on the front. It looks kind of okay, doesn't it? It's again, it's that 1950s building that is pretending to be like this 1830s Georgian building. But from the rear, it's no beauty. You start to see that kind of concrete frame is much more prevalent at the back. And again, we're just going through this, taking all that we've learned from the other buildings and applying these kind of lessons, you know, through making these linings that offer something to the students, somewhere to sit or a notice board or wayfinding or something like that. And then rationalizing things like lighting and finishes. And so these are going to be so we're going out to tender, I think, in a couple of weeks on this project. And then one that is in the future, it might be our only ever new build project in Belvedere. And this is a second sports hall that the campus needs. And the challenge here was to actually find a space on the campus for what will be a relatively large building. And the only suitable site we could find was on the roof of the theatre building, which is here, which currently has an external soccer pitch. So this is that new structure sitting on top of the theatre below. And I think we might have slightly shot ourselves in the foot, as it's really not going to be an easy project to build. What we've discovered so far is that the weight of the new building and its effect on the triple height theatre below means that materials and construction methods will be very, very, very restricted. And our old friend fire protection is also going to be incredibly difficult. Everything is achievable, but we just have to figure out how to do it. But the end result is potentially this amazing sports space in the sky with incredible views across the city. And this is Croke Park, which is our sort of largest stadium. So we're looking directly out towards it there. So anyway, I think I'm going to leave it there. And if you have any questions, I thank you for having me, number one. And if you have any questions, I'm sure Aaron will maybe ask them. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Alice. That was fantastic. Exactly what I'm hoping you might bring. Oh dear, what have I clicked on? Oh, sorry, wrong button. I haven't had any questions come in yet, but that's not unusual. I'm hoping that Cian might just do a quick whip around and try and shame some people into supplying a couple of questions. It's rather fortunate though, because I have lots of questions for you, Alice. But I'm a terrible question asker. So I've written myself a few notes as you're going through. So we'll kick off with one of my questions and see if something else shows up in the meantime. I wanted to ask you just a little bit about the kinds of themes that you're talking about with Belvedere. So I mean, you may feel free to contradict me, but it's kind of slightly unglamorous work in the sense that you know, it's kind of itsy, and it's not necessarily the kind of commission that sort of heroic capital A architecture commission that maybe when you sign up to do architecture you think is the sort of end goal of your career. And yet, despite that, I mean, you guys find so many opportunities for uh, delight within the kind of difficulties and the pragmatics of trying to make these projects happen. And I'm the kind of sad person who has read both of your PhD dissertations, and I think they're fantastic. They're some of the best that have come out of that RMIT program, and I know Cian in particular writes about this tendency within his practice to blend the local observations. I think he uses the word decorum with the pragmatic constraints of a project, which I know is something that you spoke a bit about in the presentation today, but also bringing in, I think the word that he uses is exotica, or these kind of borrowed references from things perhaps that you've seen on your travels, like the big trip that you guys took before you set up the practice. And it kind of, I suppose it all makes me wonder how you see the role of an architect, whether and whether or not you think maybe that started to shift. You know, I sort of imagine the kind of Siam era of architect would turn down this sort of a commission at Belvedere, or they, you know, that would be something you do for the vast amounts of wealth that you must be getting for doing these projects.
Yeah, oh,
And
for certain.
you know, the portfolio projects are the other one, the kind of standalone heroic iconic forms glistening in the sun. I mean, is that shifting? Is it shifting in Ireland? Is that do you think that's a misnomer? How do you see it? How do you see your role?
I certainly think it is. So we, as I say, this is not the normal way we work in the practice, although we have been doing it for the last 10 years or so. So maybe it is normal. And yeah, there's some part of it that makes us uncomfortable because as architects, you want to be in control of everything. You want to, you know, make that iconic, whatever it is. But these projects are inherently compromised. But then when I think about it, all projects are inherently compromised. There are so many. I can't think of a project in our practice that there, even though the output might be what appears to be maybe this, you know, epic, you know, standalone perfect thing, they all come out of those compromises or those pragmatic responses to, or sort of maybe more poetic responses to pragmatic problems. So that's what we're always trying to do. And every project that we have, we try not to take on projects that are just to keep the office, you know, ticking over. We try to bring the same sensibility to every project. Now that sensibility needs to adapt to the project that's in front of you. But I certainly think this way of working and adapting and refurbishing existing buildings is it's just the future. We certainly in Ireland, and I'm sure Australia's similar. Knocking things down and building new buildings is going to become a thing of the past. I mean, I don't think in the near future, but I would imagine in the next 10, 20 years. So certainly I know that we have in Ireland for houses, you can't knock down a house unless you can justify it in terms of embodied or carbon, you know, carbon in use or embodied carbon. So what tends to happen in housing tends to spread out to the rest of the industry. So I think we're going to find it really difficult to demolish, and then we've all got to learn how to work in this way a bit and be okay with a bit of compromise, and that we sort of have to be reactive rather than sort of having this perfect idea in the sky that somehow arrives down fully formed.
So we've had one come in. I've just found it in the webinar chat rather than the Q&A. Tisk. And that is, can you talk about strategies for building on top of existing buildings? Many of the students see this as a potential solution for their project.
Yes, I mean, in university, all things are possible, and actually in construction, all things are possible as well. What we're finding the challenge now, and it depends how far you're going to go in terms of, there's lots of pragmatic things in university that nobody really wants to think about, and I don't think it's really a time to get into it too much. But certainly it's very particular to whatever it is you're building on top of. In our case, we were sort of not unlucky, we knew what was there, but the fact that it's a big triple height space underneath means that the structural capacity of the building isn't much, because the structural engineer will allow you to add 10% more load onto the existing structure. And I'm probably getting too technical, but if you have lots of intermediate floors, that means you've got 10% of a bigger loading. But the fact that it's just one big space underneath it means that it's very difficult. So again, it's all sort of contingent on what the existing building that you're building of is made of, and its kind of form and you know, the amount of floors and things like that in it. There's also things like, how do you adjoin onto in that sports building? It's going to have to adjoin onto other buildings either side, and so then it's about ensuring things like you've got 60 minutes fire separation between the two. Again, I don't know how much you're going to get into this in university, but there's a lot of pragmatic consideration. Again, we have things like we're lucky again that there's 2 existing stair cores in the building. So locating the building, the new sports hall, so that it can take advantage of the existing stair cores, so we don't necessarily have to build new things to get up to that level. But again, in college, you can kind of push those pragmatics much more. Maybe it's much more important that, you know, there's something architecturally that you benefit from creating sort of new ways up into the space. And what we're going to find is the architectural language is going to come completely out of these restrictions. It's got to be lightweight. It needs to be so lightweight that we can't use any plasterboard. So we have to expose the steel structure that is going to make this. So there's an architectural language straight away, you know. So in some ways we welcome in these restrictions. My biggest nightmare is to have a building on a greenfield site where and a limitless budget, you know. Who knows what to do with that?
Oh, the horror. Yes, that would be terrible. I think I put a similar question to Colm a couple of weeks ago, and that is a kind of more general question just about the Dublin scene. I'm not sure if someone's coined a term to describe you all yet, or try and throw a handkerchief over you, but I'm conscious that it's definitely been a clutch of really exciting practices come out of Ireland in the last couple of decades, and there's before that there's a number of also really excellent practices like Grafton, Donald and Toomey, who you mentioned, Tom DePayo, who was out in Brisbane. Oh God, it's probably 10 or 15 years ago now.
Mm.
I wonder if you have any thoughts on that, whether it's I seem to recall you talking about your own time as a student and not particularly enjoying it, but I wonder if it's got something to do with the schools or the teachers at the schools in that period, or whether it's the influence of a group of practices who kind of raised standards and trained and kind of developed talent, or is it just one of those things that happens every now and then, that a number of people just kind of emerge and something is created?
I think I mean, a really crap answer to that is it's probably a combination of all of that. Like, certainly there were a lot of very good practices in Dublin and in Ireland. I mean, it's not just Dublin, you know, in maybe the generation before us. Um, the college that I went to, I'm not sure I was a very good student. I didn't engage very well. I think I was too young to be in college, so I didn't perform very well in college at all. And we weren't necessarily taught by a lot of those kind of leading lights. They tended to be in UCD, which is the sort of other college. But so there was a lot of, so that's saying just because I wasn't taught necessarily by these very kind of well-known practices, a lot of people my age were. And so that obviously had a huge influence. And they in turn were taught by UCD, I think, had a strategy in the 70s. They used to call it the Flying Circus, where they flew in people from London to teach. So they taught that generation above us, and then that generation taught us. So there is certainly something in that passes on, that there's a level of ambition and a level of enthusiasm and knowledge and all that kind of stuff that goes in there. But I actually think, certainly for, let's say, the group of practices, or my generation of practices, weirdly, I have a feeling that a big influence on us was the recession. We all lost our jobs at the same time. We all had to make practices because there was nothing else to do. There was only, you know, we all had mortgages. Back in the day when you could buy a house when you were 30, and we'd all just bought houses and then suddenly had no way to pay those mortgages. So we just had to make our own work. We had to take whatever was around. And then we were young enough to want to really make something good for that. Apologies, there's a phone in the background. But yeah, so we had to make our own opportunity there. And we were very interested in building. We'd also spent a lot of time, we hadn't come out of college and set up our practices. All of us had, you know, done the apprenticeship and other practices. We'd seen what it takes. So you come out of college or university, I think, and you think design is, you know, if I'm a brilliant designer, I'll be a brilliant architect. And that's not necessarily it. There's a whole range of skills that you need to learn that aren't related to design, but they facilitate design, they facilitate those good things. So yeah, we'd all spend that. So other than that, and then we all, again, I think ambition creates ambition. And so when you start kind of hanging out with people that want to do really good things, it makes you want to do. And as I say, Dublin's very small, so it's easy to do that, you know. So it's probably a really, you know, just a lucky set of circumstances that means, and we're hoping that you know, there's another generation coming through, although it's harder now, I think, to to get the will to set up your own practice. There's a lot more regulation that you have to know about. It's also difficult when you can't buy a house and all things like that. You know, that motivation maybe goes as well. So we're hoping there's good practices that are coming along, certainly out of Dublin. They may be less interested in building things and more interested in thinking about building things, but that's just a different way of practicing, you know.
Well, I think that's a great note to wrap up on. So for all the students, we've just had another question come through. I'm not sure whether I should pass it on. It's from one Stuart Vokes. Would you be willing?
Please, yes, no, love to hear it.
All right, yeah. We'll see. The micro projects at the Boys College are marvelously transformative and humane. Are you consciously commencing projects by thinking about occupancy, or are you more interested in the material character, tectonics, and light?
Again, crap answer, but a combination of two. We're very occupancy in somewhere like a school. Like there's so much work done in schools that is inhumane. You know, it's just fit as many people in, and they get the cheapest stuff. None of it lasts very long. And that's only it's only in the last 20 or 30 years that we think of schools that way. Like before, school buildings were beautiful, they were robust, they had ventilation, they had light, you know, and it's crazy that in the last, maybe 30 or 40 years, that seems to have gone out the window. So we're trying to, especially in a lot of the older buildings, is really bring them back to the great buildings that they were before. And a lot of that is thinking about occupation of them. And then we're always interested in the material character and sensibility. And so it's a combination. In Belvedere, I think more than any other of their projects, they're the kind of only two weapons in our arsenal in some ways. You know, in other buildings, we can think about a lot more. But yeah, for certain, it's about making humane school buildings again, if we can.
All right, I haven't got any more questions coming at me. So yeah, look, great to give some hope to students who aren't enjoying their university education. So to all the
There's light at the end
group,
of the tunnel. Practice
all the
is different.
students that are in our group who see themselves as attending the inferior university in town and who are uninspired by their teachers, there is hope ahead, particularly if there's a tariff-induced recession. It'll only make you stronger.
Exactly. There's hope in the darkness. But I feel like I've kind of slightly slagged off I teach in the university that I went to now. So the teaching is of an incredibly high standard there.
Oh, fantastic. Good. I've never been invited back to my alma mater. So I'm glad for it. All right. Thank you, Alice. That was so wonderful. Really appreciate you taking the time. We're super fortunate to have you involved. So I'll release you back to the wild and look forward to speaking to you at some point in the future.
For certain. And thank you so much for asking me, and good luck with the project.
Absolutely. Well, I'm more focused on the holiday, but yes,
well, good luck with the holiday
too.
And then the project after.
All right. Thanks.
Thanks very much.
I'll see everyone else in a couple of weeks. Bye.
Bye-bye.